Good morning, everybody. This is a live emergency briefing as the active ring of fire pattern continues. We've got severe storms. We have a monster hail producer to the west-southwest of Mobridge right now. Also just to the south of Highway 20 near the Whitehorse area. Big time hail. You can even see the mesocyclone as well. This is a slightly elevated supercell. Probably going to turn into a major windbag event. 2.5-inch diameter hail, 80-mile-per-hour winds associated with that storm right now to the west-southwest of Mobridge. Beautiful countryside up there across northwestern South Dakota, but this storm is going to be absolutely devastating for agriculture, crops across the area. Just to the east of Timber Lake, right along Highway 20 to the north of Whitehorse. That's where this dangerous storm is located, and this is a very large hail producer. As I mentioned, you can use some of the dual pole products to try to figure out where the largest hail is falling. And there it is. There you can see that large hail core just to the south of Highway 20, falling to the north of Whitehorse as well. Very impactful hail to larger than baseball size in diameter. And here is the Mobridge area just upstream. This storm is sliding off to the east-southeast. It is propagating east-southeast because of the very strong mesocyclone that is in place here. You can see kind of a bit more of a diffuse forward flank gradient, but then you have this massive hook echo. And one thing that Mark recently showed is that the very largest of the hail, and at least the most damaging hail, is a lot of times driven by these large hook echoes. It can exceed terminal velocity. They're falling diagonally, driven by those very strong downdraft and horizontal winds of the rear flank downdraft, and those can be absolutely destructive hail producers. And the severe thunderstorm warnings go all the way down to the Faith area. There's Faith, there's Dupree, big time tornadoes out there around 2010, June 16 that we missed. We ended up targeting eastern Montana on that day. Tornado factory stationary near Dupree. The next day, though, on June 17, 2010, we intercepted all kinds of tornadoes in west central, northwest Minnesota. Wadena had 2 EF4s from 2 separate storms. One that was a very large wedge tornado near Elmora Bluffton that we launched our air cannons into before the time when we had trackable sensors that were working really well. But a lot of backstory around this area. Faith to Dupree. Also saw that big time storm May 22nd, 2010. Or excuse me, May 24, 2010. A couple of days after the Bottle tornado. But this is definitely a forward propagating windbag. You can see there are some elevated supercells back behind the gust front. Definitely the dominant hail producer up here to the west of the Mobridge area, dropping off to the east-southeast. Baseball size hail, 80-mile-per-hour winds associated with that storm. Let me show you what this looks like on satellite imagery. Pretty incredible look. Big anvil. I am wondering if this could even turn into a derecho eventually. I wouldn't be surprised if it does eventually classify as such. You can see a very large hook, very large anvil on this storm. And let me show you. Also want to show you the HRRR as well, the latest HRRR that definitely shows that windbag just dominating across the entire state. There you can see it moving across northern South Dakota, eventually arriving almost to the I-29 corridor before those eventually start to die out. But right now, I'm not seeing very much that suggests that this complex is going to weaken as it moves off to the east. Look at the satellite imagery. Just an absolutely massive upper level presentation. Major diffluence aloft. Definitely a large anvil of this complex of storms. And you can even see the overshooting top just west of Mobridge. Look at that overshooting top with some of the shadows off of those turrets. Definitely showing you the very strong updraft with that mesocyclone. Looks like you have a little bit of a kicker system as well coming into the northwest portion of South Dakota. But this very large anvil is just going to continue. There's deep dew points upstream of this as well. Dew points into the 70s across the Corn Belt of eastern South Dakota. That moisture is certainly going to feed this MCS, and you can kind of make out the boundary that this storm is riding along. Central into eastern South Dakota. I do think that this lead elevated supercell storm that's dropping the baseball size hail to the west of Mobridge is going to continue to move east-southeast. Propagation should dominate over translation, and that should cause that complex to turn off to the east-southeast. But I also noticed that there's a lot more development that happens with this system. And initially, this is an active ring of fire pattern. Basically, you have complexes of storms, multiple complexes of storms that will form over top that ridge. And there you can see the Nebraska-South Dakota border. There's our complex that we're watching now that eventually peters out by the time it reaches the I-29 corridor. And then that outflow boundary sags southward to the South Dakota-Nebraska border from way up here. That bore sets up shop down near the Nebraska-South Dakota border. And that leads to the development of numerous clusters of storms. Probably damaging wind is going to be the main threat. There is an enhanced risk down here later on this afternoon for this eruption of storms from the Nebraska Sandhills right along the border. Wouldn't be surprised to see some flash flooding as well from this event. The Weather Prediction Center does have a slight risk for excessive rainfall across this area. A larger slight risk, though, further east, portions of West Virginia, the Ohio River Valley, into western Virginia. Looks like 3 days in a row of severe weather across the East Coast, and we're also going to be breaking that down as well. But we do have this large windbag sliding off to the southeast. Looking at the surface map. Very important. Usually I do a top-down approach to the forecast. I start off at the level of non-divergence at 500 millibars. Look for where those disturbances are located. We'll do that next, but want to pull up a surface map first to show you all the deep moisture that's in place. And the deepest of the moisture is actually concentrated further to the south along the I-90 corridor, the Corn Palace, Mitchell, Sioux Falls, areas off to the west. You've got mid-70s dew points across the Corn Belt of South Dakota. You still have 70s dew points as well, and easterly and northeasterly winds, which are very favorable for the formation of those guerrilla hail producers that we have to the west of Mobridge right now. Northeast, there's Mobridge. Just to the west of that, you can see 73 over 66. Inflow winds, big northeasterly inflow, gusting at 23 miles an hour in Mobridge with that severe storm just to the west. And it is trying to build southward toward the Black Hills, and you just have a ton of moisture. You're cooking out here. Temperatures rising through the 80s right now. We can take a look at the RAP analysis. This will show us some of the parameters. There you can see a new mesoscale discussion too that has been issued. The evolution of a growing and increasingly well-organized cluster of storms with increasing severe weather risk, wind risk possible from through 11 a.m. to 1 p.m. Central Time. Definitely looking at that HRRR model that shows this eventually losing steam as it passes into eastern South Dakota, and then that outflow boundary sags down to the south a little bit toward the Nebraska-South Dakota border, and that's when it looks like another round of severe weather is going to begin later on this afternoon. Here is the RAP analysis. Textbook environment for these guerrilla hail producers. It seems like you get the largest hail from these supercells that are a little bit elevated. You can see all this blue dominating the entire state of South Dakota. That's convective inhibition or negative CAPE at the low levels. And I was talking to my good friends Vince and Brandon yesterday about how oftentimes a low-level jet that's streaming up and over top a shallow stable layer to the north of an outflow boundary, it seems relatively ineffective at grabbing that outflow boundary and just launching it northward. That's what would have had to happen yesterday for that outflow boundary to reach up into southern Wisconsin, and then we probably would have had a tornado outbreak with those multiple supercell storms that ended up initiating. But that outflow boundary ended up hanging down near the Davenport area. Temperatures in the low 90s to the south of Davenport, basically near 80 to the north with upper 70s dew points. And that shallow stable layer was the difference between those storms taking full advantage of immense wind shear and not. And look at this latest RAP analysis. Now you've got a lot of that blue starting to dissipate out ahead of this complex of storms. That's showing you that you have reduced convective inhibition. You could definitely see the greater CAPE along the I-90 corridor around the southern half of South Dakota. I think that this complex is going to want to desire to propagate toward those mid-70s dew points. So I think that this is going to continue turning off to the east-southeast. Eventually it's going to arrive near the I-90 corridor, the deeper moisture down there, mid-70s dew points, and I think that that's going to be plenty to reinvigorate that convection. There's some modest bulk shear, but with that moisture, with these easterly winds, you're probably going to have enough low-level shear to maintain vertically oriented convection along the leading edge of that boundary. Stepping forward 2 hours, definitely those storms move into an environment with northeasterly flow. You have a blob of 3,000 plus Cape developing ahead of it as well. So I really don't think that storm is going to weaken at least for the next probably 2, 3, 4 hours. It's probably going to eventually move into this weaker bulk shear. Eventually, as it approaches the I-29 corridor, it could lose steam. And even the wrap shows that Mobridge supercell making it all the way, peaking in about 2 hours to the west of Aberdeen, west of Bowdle, and then it starts to weaken in about 4 hours time. 4 hours time being 19Z, about 1 p.m. So by early afternoon, that complex starts to lose steam, but the outflow boundary then sags down into southern South Dakota and possibly settling near the Nebraska-South Dakota border, and that's going to be the focus for additional severe weather development. Even though you have about 20 to 25 knots aloft, if you can get a pocket of easterly winds at the low levels, and that can generate just enough bulk shear for supercell storms. And it looks like we do have relatively weak 5 to 10 knot surface winds, basically northeastward, eastward, easterly winds from northern Nebraska all the way up into central and northern South Dakota, and that's going to create just barely enough bulk shear for some transient supercell structures. But one thing I am noticing is that with the very minimal low-level jet, notice how the deeper dew points hang down near the I-90 corridor. That's the deeper moisture, about 4,000 to 5,000 Cape down across southern South Dakota, nosing up into the Black Hills. Wouldn't be surprised if there's also a reinvigoration of storms in the Black Hills later on. You also need to watch this area, northeastern Montana into northwest South Dakota, southern Saskatchewan. The short-range convective allowing models are showing splitting supercells in this environment. Relatively meager low-level wind shear as well. About 10 knots at the low levels. You do have some decent easterlies down here, but that's all behind the complex going into eastern Montana. I think this area, northeastern Montana into southern Saskatchewan, is going to be a corridor for storms. You're also going to get some additional thunderstorm development along the outflow boundary, southeastern Minnesota into southern Wisconsin. I think that would almost be a guarantee that there's going to be some storms there. Let's go now up to the upper levels and really work that top-down approach that we talk so much to forecasting. Like to start off at the upper levels, look at the shape of the upper level storm systems. You have a dominant anticyclone over the southern U.S. Square this thing up. So there you can see this dominant anticyclone across the southern U.S. And you have a jet stream that's riding over the top of the ridge. That's how we call these ridge riders, or a ring of fire. You get a lot of severe weather as these disturbances migrate around the top of the ridge. You have another one right here too, near the Ohio River Valley. This one's a little bit faster than we thought. A couple of days ago, the NAM model was showing this upper shortwave that triggered the severe weather yesterday across northern Wisconsin, that would be moving a little bit slower and potentially could bring some significant severe weather to portions of Pennsylvania as well as New York. But this thing is just too fast, and it's going to slide off the East Coast. It's going to turn all the low-level winds from about 1 kilometer down to the surface out of more of a westerly direction, reducing the low-level wind shear. This disturbance here, though, is definitely associated with the windbag in itself. May bring some flash flooding to the higher terrain of West Virginia and Virginia, and could be a reinvigoration of the severe weather to the east of the Appalachians once it hits that deeper moisture. And then 2 more days of severe weather across the eastern U.S. It starts off a little bit further north today, then it's going to sag down a little bit further south toward more of North Carolina. Portions of South Carolina are going to be included on Thursday in severe weather, and it looks like the upper level flow gradually increasing. Northwest flow event off the Appalachians. There's been a ton of supercells in northwest flow across the mid-Atlantic today, or this season, across Virginia, even northern North Carolina. My good friend Peter Forrester out there has just been tearing it up across the mid-Atlantic to the east of the Appalachians with southeasterly moving supercells during spring and summer. I'm also watching this pattern. There is a semi-permanent trough off the northwestern U.S., and it does look like on Friday, Saturday, Sunday, there's going to be a very potent trough ejection that's going to be moving Thursday first across portions of Alberta. Friday, it looks like that severe weather threat focuses across North Dakota and southern Saskatchewan. And then on Saturday, as the trough collapses, it looks like we could have some more MCS, severe weather hailers on Sunday across portions of the Central Plains. But that is the general pattern. And going 12 hours from now, notice how our disturbance across the northeast by peak heating is way off the east coast. There's our disturbance. If this were a slower moving disturbance, we probably would have had tornadoes yesterday across southern Wisconsin, and we'd probably be chasing Pennsylvania today. But this system is going to be going off the east coast by peak heating, and in its wake, you're going to shift all of those low-level winds to more of a westerly component, which reduces low-level wind shear unless you basically have a due southerly moving storm, which, who knows, east of the Appalachians could happen. You have some decent flow down here across Virginia up to the Delmarva. Definitely stronger flow here than you do across portions of the enhanced risk area. I guess up near the I-90 corridor, you get some more favorable kinematics by peak heating. That's likely going to proliferate that wind bag into eastern South Dakota, and then the outflow boundary is going to sag down near the Nebraska-South Dakota border, and that's going to be the focus for additional severe storms too. So watch as I go forward with time each day. This is going to be tomorrow. This is Wednesday at peak heating. Notice how across Virginia and North Carolina, you have an increase in that northwesterly flow. Goes across West Virginia, down into Virginia. The disturbance that's today further west is going to be diving east-southeast across the Corn Belt tomorrow. Could bring more severe weather. Complexes of storms across Iowa and portions of Minnesota. And then as I go forward to Thursday, look at this disturbance. And you have to wonder if the NAM is going to be too slow with this, and it could be a little bit faster with this disturbance on Thursday. Definitely going to have to chase this event, probably West Virginia, southern Pennsylvania, or do I chase Alberta ahead of this main trough on Thursday? An ejecting trough from the Pacific Northwest coming up to portions of Alberta on Thursday. Southeasterly winds. Post-frontal environment lifts way to the north in northern Alberta. Here's a low pressure that slides southeast through Virginia on Thursday. Possibly could be some backed winds associated with that subtle surface low into central Virginia on Thursday. I'm going to have to keep an eye on that. And then you get this low across eastern Montana with easterly winds across northeastern Montana into northwestern North Dakota. I'm going to have to keep an eye on that as well. And then the severe weather threat on Friday shifts to portions of Saskatchewan, northeastern Montana, and even a little bit further east across western North Dakota, despite the ridging aloft. A lot of times you'll get those supercells way downstream of the parent trough. But look at this high pressure toward the end of the week that settles down near the Four Corners region of the desert southwest. That could have some southerly flow on it. You also have Hurricane Bonnie down in the tropical eastern Pacific that ended up really intensifying after that crossover into the tropical eastern Pacific. I do think that there could also be a reinvigoration of the monsoon flow down into the southeast U.S. as that high slides off to the west. But looking at the surface dew points, not much of a moisture surge is evident. Might have to be late July with a more favorable MJO pattern to really reinvigorate the monsoon across the southwestern U.S. But this is on Friday. We're going to watch that trough ejection from Alberta up into Saskatchewan. Let's see the day before on Thursday. And just in general, I'm using the 0 to 3 kilometer EHIs to really pick out where those more favorable environments are located. Here is the very favorable environment across central Virginia into central North Carolina. That's ahead of that weak surface low as well. A northwest flow event Wednesday and Thursday. Tomorrow and Thursday across this area. Could also be some flash flooding into the higher terrain. West Virginia, portions of Maryland, western Virginia as well. Even western North Carolina could get in on some of that action. But I might have to head over to northeast Montana into western North Dakota on Thursday as well. And probably some more complexes of storms capable of some heavy rain across northern Missouri, southern Iowa. But during the summertime, forecasting like this is very complicated. A lot of times, these different target areas depend on the evolution of complexes of storms and destabilization in their wake, formation of MCVs, kind of the intensification of anticyclones. Sometimes the position and strength of anticyclones can be more difficult to forecast than troughs. But I could see some pretty substantial severe weather with that disturbance coming in northwest flow, at least according to the NAM, which in all fairness hasn't been doing very good with this ring of fire pattern. But we do get just some west-southwesterly flow ahead of that surface low, 20 knots in some locations. Might even be just enough, coupled with some big cape and deep moisture. I mean, look at those upper 70s dew points here across the Carolina, Piedmont, up to Virginia. Mid 60s dew points wrapping up into northeastern Montana, into western North Dakota. 60s dew points as well across Alberta ahead of that upper trough. Certainly could set the stage for more rounds of severe weather across the Canadian prairies. Look at that cape blob in Alberta. Big cape too as that system dives toward Virginia. Look at that 4,000 cape it looks like. Looking at the convective allowing models, you have big cape across central Montana. But look at that down in the southeastern U.S. All those holes in the cape, those are all likely strong to severe storms. And the 3-kilometer NAM just goes nuts. Look at that on Thursday. Gotta wonder if there's going to be some flash flood chasing opportunities. Heavy storms moving through the higher terrain here Thursday afternoon at peak heating. Other severe storms down near the Carolina Piedmont. Moving into the Carolina Piedmont. Some renegade potential. Even some potential across eastern North Carolina, southeast Virginia. But we're still so far out, there's not a ton of value gained by looking at these convective allowing models, except that there's going to be vigorous convection moving through the North Carolina Piedmont area. Might just have to get on a storm like this. Looking at a quick forecast sounding out ahead of that. Very small, compact photographs, not a ton of bulk shear. Big cape at least. Probably more severe storms, but some potential big QPF across the higher terrain. Southwest Virginia could certainly, with that weaker flow aloft, get some more stagnant storms that are moving through the higher terrain. Could even get some flash flooding across this area, all the way up into eastern West Virginia, portions of central and eastern Maryland, south central Pennsylvania as well. Could get in on the action. Severe storms, flash flooding on Thursday. But the real question is, do I chase the Canadian prairies? Do I chase the East Coast? Do I chase these ridge riders? Do I sit here on my ass and just do briefings? I've been getting in a lot of cardio, riding my bike and everything recently too. But really, you have this massive ridge through the central U.S. all the way up into the central Canadian prairies. You got to wonder if that's going to try to curtail or at least weaken the severe weather season in Alberta. But look at this Saskatchewan. Look at this on Friday. Pretty big trough ejection from Alberta into Saskatchewan, Friday into Saturday. There it is on the GFS. There's the ridge that focuses a little bit off to the west near the Four Corners region by Friday evening. You go forward to Saturday, and look at that. The trough does flatten out over top the ridge dominating the southwest U.S., the Four Corners. Trough flattens out on Saturday, but I think this is going to be a big severe weather event. Eastern Montana into North Dakota. Low-level jets probably pushed a little east. Yeah, a weaker low-level jet, even some northerly low-level winds. A lot of times this doesn't do as well with the low-level jet across the central Canadian prairies. Does look like it's focused a little bit further east across central and eastern South Dakota and portions of Minnesota. But next weekend looks like an active pattern for severe weather. You're going to have another ridge rider. This is the trough that's ejecting across southern Alberta and Saskatchewan. Eventually it rides the ridge and heads toward the Corn Belt. On Sunday, Man, I'm having an allergy attack here. Excuse me. Eastern Nebraska into western Iowa on Sunday could be a threat. Excuse me. Major allergy attack. Imminent. I'm going to have to let you guys go. But I want to look at the wind bag one more time. The large hail producer that's sliding to the south of Mobridge. There it is. Hail size has come down a little bit still. 1.75 inch hail, 80 mile per hour winds associated with that. It does still have the elevated mesocyclone. Gotta wonder if that thing has peaked. There's the elevated mesocyclone, but still has some very large hail. Hail sizes have come down since when we first started this briefing. But there you can see the main hail core passing to the south of Mobridge, southwest of Mobridge. And this is mainly a hail and wind bag. It's going to be one of those events where you're barely going to be able to see. There's going to be wind-driven hail. You can see the spiral bands as well, feeding into that mesocyclone. Spiral banding happening. Tornado potential is basically zero with an event like this. You've got a lot of convective inhibition or sin at the low levels. That's the opposite of Cape, negative buoyancy that this is battling against. But this storm is sliding over top that stable air at the low levels. And a lot of times these elevated supercells like this will even have larger hail. Usually you get northeasterly surface winds flipping around to west-northwesterly. You get a ton of directional shear. You have still a lot of cold air aloft here this far north with these events that are riding over the ridge. And it's also trying to build down toward I-90. And this outflow boundary associated with this complex of storms eventually is going to settle down into far southern South Dakota, very near the Nebraska-South Dakota border. And I think that that's going to be the focus of additional thunderstorm development this late afternoon and through the evening. There's your remnants of the complex of storms across central Ohio, eastern Indiana through central Ohio, all the way out to the Charleston area. Already training thunderstorms through central West Virginia. You're going to have quite a bit of rain out here. That's why there is a slight risk for excessive rainfall and the potential for flash flooding into central West Virginia. Multiple rounds of storms heading east-southeast through the area, but the disturbance was way too fast, so I don't think we're going to get significant severe weather across any of this area today. Shortwave trough is going to slide off the eastern seaboard by peak heating, and so I don't anticipate any significant severe weather today across Pennsylvania. So thank you everybody for tuning into this live weather report. Hit that notification bell. Looks like I am going to be storm chasing the next few days. Here, very moist, unstable environment, some flash flood potential, some severe weather, maybe an isolated mesoscale accident tornado as well. And I'm still considering heading to the Northern Plains Friday, Saturday, Sunday, maybe even the Canadian prairies. Thank you everybody for tuning in to this live, in-depth weather report. Never stop chasing.